Hey guys, Kinggath here with another episode of the Kinggath podcast. I once again have somebody on from a mod we are all very, very excited to see. He is the current lead on the Fallout 4 New Vegas project. Welcome, Metamoth.
Glad to be here.
I'm very excited to talk to you, and I think a lot of people are going to be excited to listen to this because New Vegas is such. I think it's gone on in memory to be everybody's favorite Fallout. You know, maybe it didn't start out that way when it came out. It was a little rocky launch, but I think in hindsight now, after all of its fixes and all the modding that came out for it, I think most people would agree that it's the best Fallout game. So seeing it remade with all of the improved gunplay of Fallout 4 and whatever other changes you guys are going to make is really exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely really exciting. I mean, I got involved with this project way back when it sort of founded itself, literally just because I wanted to see this project happen.
That's a good enough reason. I take it then you are in agreement that New Vegas is the best Fallout experience outside of what you guys are hoping to create.
It's kind of a complicated thing. I think New Vegas is the best Fallout RPG, whereas I think Fallout 3 might be the best really looter shooter. It was better at what Fallout 4 tried to do, and it has a really solid grasp on its setting and the tone it wants to convey, and I think each game is sort of better for that in its own way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think Bethesda. One of the things I keep hearing Todd Howard repeat is that how important tone is, and you can really see that in their games as each one really seems to they have that figured out, and like you can see when you start seeing all of the mods come together, and you can tell that most of us mod authors don't quite have the grasp on that, where some things start to feel disjointed, and then you can tell that everything that Bethesda puts out does seem to at least have a cohesive vision to it. It really feels like it all belongs together.
100%. That's actually something that working on F4NV we're always acutely aware of. It's kind of that constant awareness of, we are not a professional dev team, and we might have a lot of industry people working on Fallout 4 New Vegas, but at the same time, we're not psychic and we're not, the combined efforts of Obsidian or Bethesda. So we try to err on the side of caution for some things so that way we don't end up creating moments or scenes or environments that feel out of place alongside the things we're remaking.
Right. So that's a real interesting part of this project is that, and I'm actually glad you guys took this direction. So I think a lot of people are hoping Fallout 4 New Vegas is literally just a remake with better graphics, but you guys are embracing the positive changes that Fallout 4 brings to the engine. Is that correct?
100%. When we sort of set off with Fallout 4 New Vegas, because we were lucky in that we had a project before us that had failed, but we had a chance for a clean break and a clean beginning. So one of the first things we laid out when we started was, okay, we don't want to just go into this and just make a big texture pack.
Right.
If you want to play New Vegas with better graphics, there's lots of mods out there that already do that, and we don't really want to have to go out and do the same thing as they did. Right. That's kind of pointless in our eyes. When we have a brand new engine with a lot of really good features built into it, we can sit down and build something better or expand on things or mature features in New Vegas that in the original were getting there but weren't quite as well implemented as they might have been in Fallout 4.
Sure. Well, and even New Vegas itself, obviously it had a thriving modding scene, still does. So there were definitely there's room for improvement in New Vegas just by its nature. I mean, you can look at all the mods that were really popular. You can tell there was a hunger for some changes even to New Vegas's formula. So obviously, even though we all love the RPG experience of that game, it definitely has some room for changes.
Definitely. I mean, look at Project Nevada, where there are so many fantastic new feature sets built into that. And then look at Fallout 4, and a lot of what you see in that was present in Fallout 4. So looking back at that, we can kind of say, there's features here that New Vegas didn't have that people really wanted, or that we really want, and Fallout 4 either enables us to create those, or it already has them, and we just need to do some tweaking to integrate them with the New Vegas formula.
Sure. So how much are you guys letting Fallout New Vegas dictate what you're doing as far as, because you're definitely going to be in a rocky territory in the sense that you're gonna risk alienating some number of fans. I think there's no way you can avoid it, but what are you guys doing to mitigate that risk? I assume you want to give there's certain parts of New Vegas I imagine are kind of sacred cows and they have to be recreated as closely as possible, like that amazing intro video you guys did, the Ain't That a Kick in a Head video where you redid the Doc Mitchell sequence. Unbelievable. Is that the sort of thing you guys are trying to make sure kind of makes its way into Fallout 4 almost verbatim or as close to possible as it makes sense?
When we change things, one of our big sort of goals is we look at it and say, how can we update or change this while maintaining the same feel to a player, or even update and change something and make it so a player can look at it and say, that's exactly as I remember it. But going back and looking at it, you go, wow, that wasn't really good, was it? They really improved that.
Yeah. I can see, you can see that in a lot of new games when they bring them forward. Is they'll, even the games that don't necessarily aren't remakes, but whenever like a next iteration of a game comes out, you'll see them polishing things and you'll be like, oh, I don't remember that being, I thought it was always like that. If you try and go back and play the previous game, I think there'll be a lot like that. I also think you guys have an opportunity with that to happen with some voice actors. Like, I was positive when I watched Ain't That a Kick in the Head that you guys had the original Doc Mitchell voice actor. And I was just like, that's 100% him. There's no way it's not. And then it's like, okay, well, it's just, you just don't remember him that well. You just have to get close.
It's amazing how people think of something as being a cornerstone of their experience for something, or something they remember super fondly. But when they go back and actually look at it, it's not quite how they remember it. That's just, I guess, how human memory works. Yeah. And it gives us just a little bit of wiggle room to play with things, to improve things, or to tweak things and polish them.
Yeah. So what are the things you're hoping to recreate exactly? Like, I guess I want to get a scope for this whole project. So if you were to, like, first of all, why don't I let you explain it first? Like, if you were to elevator pitch this to somebody, what is it you're trying to accomplish?
We're trying to remake New Vegas. The entire storyline is to be left entirely as it is. Our big goals are to expand the world space, both literally and conceptually. And we're also aiming to take and upgrade the combat and the way that the game's mechanics feel. We're trying to polish and tidy things up while just giving a little more room and extra content, and to make the environment and world feel that much more modern, new, and believable within the new Bethesda formula.
That's fantastic. And I think that even Obsidian would be happy to hear that, because I've heard plenty of interviews with members of Obsidian where they've said that the time crunch, like they had a real strict time limit they had to deliver the product in, and like they ran into a lot of engine limitations where it derailed some of their development, that they had a lot more ideas that they never got to implement. So even they believe that there was tons of room for more stuff in the game world.
100%. Like, one of the things we did with F4NV is when we made our world space, we made it one-to-one cells to the New Vegas world space. Now, Fallout 4's world space, its cells are 25% larger than those in Fallout New Vegas. Consequently, this means our world space is now 25% larger without actually adding anything per se. Okay. This gives us room to increase the size of environmental features or just add more small locations. One of the big criticisms of New Vegas was, wow, this world feels really dead. It's like, yes, it's a desert. And I appreciate the people who say, yes, it's a desert, there shouldn't be a lot there. Yeah. But at the same time, it's also a video game, so being able to wander off in a direction and just find some neato stuff to interact with is something we feel is pretty valuable.
Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%. I think most people would. I think when you get too close to reality, you take away the purpose of a game, and then it's like, all right, well, then why don't you just go wander the desert, buddy? Like, strap a gun on your back and go shoot scorpions. There definitely, you need some gamification. I think it's, especially because I think the one of the things I've been struggling with is how long an experience should be in a game. Because when you think about it, it generally has to do with how much time the player has, and then it's like, what is the average amount of time a player has who's approaching your game, and how long do you want the experience to be? Because some players who have a lot of time and really like to immerse themselves, they might want the experience to last 1,000 hours, but then somebody else who only has a handful of hours to game each week is going to want to be able to finish it before a year passes or whatever. So that can be a tough struggle, I think, in figuring out how much stuff you want to cram in and how complicated you want to make it.
Definitely, and I mean, that goes back to one of the big sort of cornerstones. We're not adding any new writing to Fallout 4 New Vegas. Ignoring the massive hurdle of adding even more voice acting to our massive pile of voice acting that needs to be done, this even goes back to what you were saying earlier. If you look at writing done for mods, more often than not, you can tell it's writing done by a mod, and that doesn't mean it's bad writing, it just has certain tonal issues, or it just feels the tiniest bit out of place alongside the base game. Right. We don't really want to do a whole lot of that with Fallout 4 New Vegas. We'll be making small additions here and there, but nothing broad and sweeping, because we don't really want to have to combat the cleanup that would necessitate. And I say that as somebody who personally thinks of himself as a decent writer, and as somebody who works with a team of people, among many are very good writers.
Sure. Yeah, writing can definitely be a challenge. You can see it, and I mean, the voice, like you said, the voice acting alone is going to be a lot of work, and you also have to keep. This is something Constantine kept harping on. I had a chat with him about Miami. Is that one of the problems that we all face with these big mod projects is the temptation to feature creep, and I think that's just a creative. That's a creative's curse, is that you always want to do bigger and more things, but I think eventually you do have to draw some lines, or you're never going to finish your project.
Definitely. We set some very strict restrictions early on, and there's always been a bit of creep, but with the strictness of them and with constant reevaluating of our current position and where we're going, it's helped us to keep that in check along the way. Not to mention that the limitations imposed by the engine or the various just realities of developing a project like this also help to really keep us in check.
Sure. How much do you find that because you guys, I've seen the list of some of the people working on your project, and it seems like you've got some people who've got quite the reputations behind them. So people who are very, very skilled in the community, who have done a lot of modding on previous Bethesda games. Do you feel like there's any limitation in where you're drawing your boundaries based on skill sets, to where it's like, we can't do this because we don't have anybody who does X? Because I know that that's a common problem with any mod team or any mod in general, is that a lot of times they hit walls because it's like, we don't know somebody who does this or this or this. Do you have any of that going on, or do you guys have your bases pretty well covered on the New Vegas team?
It's not a common thing. Like, we don't give hard numbers on team size, but at our peak, depending on, seasonal requirements and all that fun stuff, it's like we're a fishing boat, I guess. Our team has about 150 people, counting voice actors.
Jeez.
So more often than not, we do have somebody who can do something. Or if they don't know how to do it, we have somebody who's crazy enough to step up and say, hey, I'm going to learn how to do this.
Right. Well, and it's especially exciting. I think, man, it's such an exciting project to do something like that because you have all of this collective nostalgia to draw from, to inspire people, and like everybody can be like, oh, I get to reimagine what this thing from New Vegas would be. Like, I really love the new version of the what's that machine called, the Vigor Tester? Like, oh my
Yes.
god, you guys nailed that. It looks so good. Like, such a great reimagining of that with modern animations and stuff.
Yeah, so many people chipped in on that just to make it just perfect. It was such a fantastic collaborative experience just to watch people like start chipping in bits of it, and the critique and the tweaks and everything. And when it was done, it was just everybody looking into that and saying, wow, that looks really good. Was a fantastic moment for us in just getting the entire introductory sequence finished.
Yeah, that thing is really, really fantastic, and so I think you guys kind of set the bar for yourselves by releasing that, which is kind of a cool thing to do. I love that you guys are now, you've set the expectations, so like all players are going to expect that level of quality or higher, and I imagine if you guys are as passionate about it as you seem, then you're gonna not let yourselves not reach that. Is that a fair assessment?
100%.
That's awesome to hear. So, is there anything else that you guys have done that you've already shown that maybe I haven't seen yet, or that you're on the verge of, like in that same vein of like, here's this classic thing you'll remember, and we found a way to improve it?
We're working on a lot of stuff to finalize a large portion of the world space, followed by which we're going to be doing a fairly considerable showcase of.
Okay.
That is one of our big goals on Fallout 4 New Vegas, and we've discussed it in the past in passing a couple of times. But our plans are to just say this part of our game is just finished. We're done with it, and this is what we have. And we want to be able just to show that to people and say, this is what we are aiming for.
Yeah.
There's so much in there I can't even begin to say, not to mention there's a little bit of quiet stuff that we want to keep a bit of a surprise.
Sure. Well, I was actually going to comment on that. Is one of the interesting things about your project versus some of the other big world space projects is that your story isn't a surprise. So when you guys figure out how to do chunks or get major milestones, you can just share those as marketing material, and it's not a big deal. Whereas for Miami or Cascadia, they're going to have to keep those. They're really exciting, like big showcase moments. They're not going to be able to show those without ruining the story for people. So you guys have a really cool scenario where you get to just show off the awesome, like when you guys finally get, say, like the rocket launch done with the ghouls, or the solar array working. Like, you get to just show that stuff off, and because everybody already knows it's coming.
It's actually kind of a funny give or take with us. Because, like you said, a lot of people love New Vegas and are very passionate about it. And we are under no illusions that our interpretation of New Vegas and the way it looks, the way it sounds, plays, all of that, is going to be different from some people. So we tend to be a little more careful about how we present things.
Sure.
Because we've made the changes that we have, we kind of want to build an experience where once you're into it, things that might seem just a little too different for people will feel right within the greater experience.
Okay, that's a good way
That
to
means
approach it,
people
for
are
sure.
more comfortable with our changes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you guys had a strong showing, and if like that intro that, and anybody listening who hasn't seen the "Ain't That a Kick in the Head" video, I'll try and remember to link it below. But just go Google that or search it on YouTube, and you will find this amazing video, which is it's basically, it goes from the moment you wake up as the courier until you finish the vigor tester and leave Doc Mitchell's. That's how all it covers, isn't it? I think that's all it was.
Correct.
Yeah. Fantastic experience, and like seeing that, it was like, okay, you guys, like, if this is what you guys are aiming for, I am super hyped for New Vegas. And I actually haven't played New Vegas in quite a while, and I think one of the things that stopped me from even firing it up again, because I actually have it installed, I was ready to play through New California, and then I think you probably have experienced the same thing a lot of mod authors have, which is once you start modding heavily and committing to it, it makes it really hard to play games, because you're just like, during that free time, you're like, well, I could be advancing our project.
Yeah, there's that. And I mean, for several years, I was working in the game development industry. So typically, if I'm not working on something, it feels weird.
Sure. Because if you're not, it's like, I should be in crunch, right? Like, always, always on the clock. I know the feel. But when I saw the stuff you guys were doing in Vegas, like, all right, well, now I have a target of when I'll experience the New Vegas storyline again. I'll wait until it comes out on Fallout 4, because one of the things that's really hard to go back to after playing Fallout 4, and I think I don't know how much people appreciate this in their nostalgia, is that Fallout 4 really knocked it out of the park with the gunplay. Like, it's so much more enjoyable than New Vegas or Fallout 3.
It borders on slick by comparison.
Yeah, and have you guys found that a lot of the mechanics that were built into 3 or New Vegas just don't work in that new environment, or that are pointless?
Honestly, it's more the opposite. A lot of those additions make the game feel better.
Really? Okay. So what kind of things are you doing? Like for well, let's use a simple example, the gun skills, because I think like one of the things they used to do is they would control weapon sway, but now that's kind of controlled by mods. What are you guys handling? How are you guys handling that? Are you bringing back that type of thing, or are you allowing it just to affect damage? Like, what's the solution for a problem like that?
Keeping in mind that this is all balancing, so that's kind of far off for us right now. But
sure.
With that being said, we tend to just use the systems alongside and complement each other. So weapon mods might make a weapon more stable, but so does your gun skill, meaning that a low gun skill character can take advantage of, say, a better stock to make a rifle shoot better, because they know they won't hit a target otherwise.
Okay. So I guess it kind of gives you some more room to be like, okay, if you can compensate for your character's lack in skills with proper equipment.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of wiggle room in there for character builds to toy with different ideas.
And that's fun. That's always good. I think everybody appreciates more options in that way, in that department. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were going to say something else on a different path, but that one just caught my. I think that's one a lot of people are wondering about, is how are you going to deal with that? Because so much of the skill points, which I am excited to see. I love the skill point system. I was a little disappointed to see that go away. So it's exciting to see that come back. And I think people have already implemented a variant of it for Fallout 4, but it looks like you guys are going right back to the full classic stuff. Like from the videos I've seen of it, it looks like you've got most of the old perks in. You've got most of the old what were the extra things called at the end? The traits. What was
traits?
Yeah, the traits in there.
Yeah, all those systems are being brought right back in and just slotted in, thanks to the awesome work done on the Level Up Menu EX mod, which gave us the front end framework to work within, and then the internal work on our back end. It just works basically seamlessly, and it works really nicely.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. So are there any other major systems that required an overhaul aside from the weapons? Or I know you said you haven't gotten to balance yet, but I'm sure you guys have had conversations and are kind of thinking about how you're going to handle these things, because there's quite a few differences in the engine that obviously have to come into play and be addressed.
Well, one of the big ones that we put a fair bit of work into and we're still toying with is hardcore mode.
Oh, okay.
Because, firstly, we can't give you the big old reward you got from Fallout New Vegas. You can't get a fantastic achievement from us, unfortunately. So, we had to come up with something worthwhile for that. But alongside, I know it's kind of a touchy subject for some people, but Fallout 4's survival mode had a lot of great ideas.
Sure.
So by looking at those and sort of fusing them with the different systems that Hardcore had, because realistically it's kind of just a more mature and maybe slightly more gamified take on it, we can build something that, in our eyes, we think will create a more interesting and more modern feeling experience while still giving the same sort of feel.
What is your team's take on something that a lot of mods have started doing, which is, especially since MCM came out, is basically taking all those types of systems and just throwing in tons of toggles and being like, you know what, if players don't like our defaults, they can turn off the pieces they don't like. Are you guys going with that same approach, or are you going with an initial release, it's going to be this standard experience, and maybe we'll talk about changes, making some of it dynamic down the road?
We will have an MCM for a number of features for Fallout 4 New Vegas, with the caveat that we will not be putting any effort into balancing them.
Okay.
So they may break the mod completely. We don't know. We're not going to really worry about that too much.
Right. So like your default out of the box settings will be a great experience. Players can tweak at their own peril.
Pretty much, yeah. We feel that's the sanest approach for us to take, with the amount of work that's going to have to go into just making what we have feel good in Fallout 4.
Yeah.
We don't have a ton of time and resources to spend on making everything else work nicely like that too.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. Actually, one of the things, that's actually one of the reasons I'm an advocate or proponent, I guess, of mod packs, is that I think that there are a lot of great players out there who spend an inordinate amount of time coming up with the right balance between mods and settings. That's where they would shine. Those types of folks who like to do that would be great at coming up with, like, here's another set of settings. And one of the things that MCM added, and I don't know if they had it in, they probably did, I just don't remember it. They added this in at least the Fallout 4 implementation, is a mod settings pack where you can basically set up config files and share them with each other or keep them between your characters. I think that was a really cool idea as a way to...
Yeah, that's awesome.
To open that up, is that then you could have players kind of experimenting with a good set of options and then releasing that as a little micro mod of, like, here you go, here's some cool settings you can pop in and have the mod play like X. But
definitely, and with the way we're building Fallout 4 New Vegas, we are 100% behind people just going in and modding it and gutting it and doing whatever they want with it.
Awesome.
Because, I mean, end of the day, that's what we're doing here in the first place, so it'd be kind of silly for us to make it a nightmare for them. So we try to be pretty... I'll use the word responsible about how we work in the creation kit and put things together in a way that means anybody can pick it up after release and say, hey, I want to, build something, and I'm going to do it, and they can look at our stuff and say, wow, this makes sense.
Right.
Which,
yeah. That's a tough...
I'm sure both of us know quite well, Bethesda doesn't always nail that.
No. Well, and that's actually really funny about their stuff, is that you can see the experience level of different teams on different quests, because the way they've said they work is they have little squads that will kind of work together and do quests and stuff, and you can just see that they'll have just massive disparities in the way they work and their scripting talent and everything. So it's very funny how disjointed the files all seem to be.
Yeah, there's some beautiful stuff in there where you can kind of piece together cut content that is never clearly elucidated on, but there's still a lot of bits and pieces scattered about that just give you just enough to make an educated guess.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of that stuff. I found tons of stuff in the workshops where they were going to have some sort of control system where the three factions were going to fight over the settlement territory. I was like, oh, that would have been amazing. And so now we've just kind of co-opted that idea, and we're just trying to build it ourselves. But lots of stuff like that where it's like, all right, well, clearly they wanted it too, so there must be something there.
Yeah. I mean, it's even the TV system they were going to have. We're pretty sure by doing some digging in the CK that you were originally supposed to go to the Galaxy News Plaza and record a TV broadcast, and that's what all the settlement TVs were for, and the big TV in Diamond City. All of that was meant to play the broadcast in place of the one you did for the Institute.
Oh, that would have been amazing. That seems like that's a mod somebody could do. I think there's enough, especially because you could just use the audio sequence from the Institute and then just lip sync a character and record it. I guess the problem there, from a technical standpoint, is anybody who's played with Videos of the Wasteland, the way they did the little videos in there is just huge files, just unworkable.
Yeah.
It would have been multi-gigs to do a small little video like that, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, you're probably familiar with how Bethesda has a test cell, and it looks like they were trying to do real-time video playback, where they were doing a portal or something to show an NPC's face over a screen, which is what they were planning for the newscaster.
Yeah.
We're pretty sure that they were actually going to use that for the player character for the recording playback.
Ah, wow. Okay, that would have been sweet. Because right now, the way they ended up implementing the little tiny bits of TV loop they have are these just monster textures, and that's just not, you can't really
they're insane.
Really work with that. Yeah. which is unfortunate that they didn't go through with that. But that seems like one of those things. It's awesome to see that Bethesda is still constantly trying to push the limits of what their engine can do. And anybody who complains about the creation engine, I don't think that they've spent enough time in it themselves into the toolkit to understand that. Effectively, when they say the creation engine, all they're talking about is their workflow. Like all of the actual under the hood things get gutted and rebuilt all the time. And you can definitely see that if you've worked on multiple of their games about the advancements they've made and the abstraction levels they've made. Like the difference between modding Fallout 4 and even Skyrim is astronomical.
It's unreal.
Yeah.
The improvements to, like, the big thing that I like to introduce new people to is lighting. Just the differences to lighting in Skyrim versus Fallout 4, because Fallout 4 is so much more capable, allows you to do much more with making nice-looking environments.
Oh yeah, and it's surprising. The engine can surprisingly hand a ton of lighting. Like I looked at some of the cells they've created themselves, like their vaults, and just the hundreds of ambient lights they will have placed everywhere. It's like, this is nuts that this can handle it. When you think about how limited you were in Skyrim, where it was like you could have one shadow light per cell or whatever it was, it was like super capped in what you could pull off. And now you almost feel like you're completely uncorked in Fallout 4, and that's definitely not the case completely. As I'm sure you guys are running into with the excessive need for previs and precombines. How has that been in the world space? Because obviously you're coming from an older game engine that obviously that the levels of limitation on that same front in New Vegas have been far outgrown. Like you have so many more tries you can work with in Fallout 4. But have you still run into some issues with performance when you're rebuilding that world space?
Not really, and that's partially because we almost always err on the side of caution. One of the big things that people ask us about, is Freeside going to be a single unified area? Or, will the Strip be unified? Are certain cells that were broken out into their own individual world spaces, such as the Aerotech business parks, will those be in the overworld? All of that was done because consoles were just dying trying to run it, especially the PlayStation 3.
Yeah.
And currently our answer is maybe, because we're trying to be very careful about it. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the way Fallout 4 has issues with extremely densely built urban areas.
Oh yeah, that's all of our problems in some settlements is the fact the game just collapses when you have more than X number of NPCs loaded at once, and it has severe draw limits on screen at once.
Yeah, so we're trying to be very, very aware of that and careful whenever we do anything.
Yeah, I really think the NPC issue alone is enough of a reason to have to separate out major cities, because if you want to have all of the scripted sequences and stuff, there's a very good chance the scenes will just break down midway through because a handful of Deathclaws outside the city happen to wander into the loaded area. Like it can be a big problem in that regard. The current cap built into the game is that only 45 NPCs will have their AI actively being messed with, which is why if you watch, I don't know how, I know where you can edit that number, but I don't know how well systems can handle when you start cranking that number up. But if you ever watch those videos of where it's like 1,000 Deathclaws versus 100 Brotherhood soldiers, most of those NPCs are just standing idle in the back waiting for somebody to die so that they can be activated.
Yeah, it's not something we really want to risk having to fight with, so we don't want to go making promises that the game engine cannot support.
Yeah, that's actually one of the most disappointing parts of 76 to me, was the fact that I saw they were still using effectively just a slightly changed Fallout 4 engine. It was like, oh, well, how are you guys going to deal with the draw limit problem and the AI limit problem? And it's like, oh, they just didn't put NPCs in. I guess that's one way to do it. But yeah, there's just a severe issue with the rendering on that. But I think it would be really, I mean, if you could even combine some of the cells, that would still be really huge, because the eliminating load screens is pretty much the biggest draw to go from console to PC, aside from just the fact that you can get just better looking stuff. But man, the load screens can be quite a downer when you're getting into a flow playing one of these games.
I can say that with the improved streaming and just the way that Fallout 4 generally loads faster, you can play Fallout 4 New Vegas a lot faster than Fallout New Vegas. It's just a monumental leap in some places.
Oh wow, that's good to hear. So how much of the world space have you guys actually built out so far? I assume you did an import process to get the topography in place, so you have the actual landscape, but then you have to then go build out all of these spaces, not to mention you have a 25% increase. So what would you say your progress is on rebuilding world space?
Well, it's worth noting first, we actually cannot import the Fallout New Vegas hype map as it was.
Oh, bummer.
Because that ties into Bethesda's restrictions on what you can or cannot do with their content.
Okay.
As such, I actually hand painted our hype map.
Oh, wow.
And then we imported that into Fallout 4.
Okay.
From there, we were able to actually start level design work. Speaking percentage-wise, we don't like to hammer down an exact number, but having been worked on and taken to beyond first look state, 80% of the world space has been touched in that way.
Okay. So it's, at least 80% of it isn't just your hype map right now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a. I mean, yeah, it's really hard to make milestones on this. It's also I know why you're being reticent to that is because once you start putting out milestones or percentages, then people get their hopes up, and you've got to manage expectations. Otherwise, people are going to be disappointed. Because I think the reality is for projects like this is those of us who take them seriously, we hunker down and gear up for for 5+ years because it's not you're not a full dev team. Everybody's got jobs. People are going to have life events that are going to pull them away from the project. So it's not. None of these are going to be like a single year turnaround or anything crazy like that. Even though us as players would all love to see that, it's just not really it's not realistic.
Yeah, we're trying to be careful about that. I mean, we come from a project that was trying to do the same thing that failed.
Sure.
We know failure's an option. We don't want to get hopes up and say, we're going to do this. We're this far along.
Right.
We'd rather just be on the level and realistic and, say, hey, this might go wrong. This might not.
Right.
And we try to get what content we can out to the community so they can actually play with the stuff our people have made.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things you guys have been doing, and we've kind of been doing the same thing. And so obviously I like that approach. And I know not all mods can do it. Like if you're doing a giant story mod, obviously releasing your story mod in chunks is a little more difficult. Like we're trying it right now, and it's definitely a big challenge because it locks you into some things maybe that you don't want to be held to. But the fact that you guys have been releasing weapons and just like little bits and pieces that are useful independently is so cool, and it's a great way to keep hype up, to show off the quality of your the people working on your project, because that's always another problem with these big projects is you have all these people investing years of their time into it, and then when it doesn't get released, it feels like, oh, did I just waste all of that time? Which, I mean, I think we would both answer, no, you didn't. You learned a ton, you built up some portfolio pieces, but it is obviously it's disappointing when one of those big projects gets canceled. So the fact that you guys have been dropping stuff onto the community is just amazing.
Yeah, and in the event Fallout 4 New Vegas were to fail, we do have contingencies in place so that the work that people have done does not go to waste.
That's awesome. That is very, very cool to hear. Do you have any chunks that are playable in the main story where if like say for example tomorrow you guys are like, we're done with the project, do you have like a chunk of the story that'd be like, here, you guys can see what it might have felt like aside from that Doc Mitchell sequence?
We have a number of pieces of quest content implemented right now. We also have a number of just ambient environmental things finished.
Oh, that's awesome.
There is a Mojave there, it just ain't finished, basically.
Sure. Now, how many of the creatures do you have to reinvent the wheel on? Because there's definitely a few of them that didn't make it into Fallout 4, like the Centaurs. Although, did the Centaurs have much appearance in New Vegas? I can't remember. I know they were all over Fallout 3.
They show up once at Black Mountain, and that's it.
Oh, so are you guys going to bother to recreate them? Because I know that anytime you have to do new creature rigs, adds a huge level of complication.
If it was in Fallout New Vegas, it'll be in Fallout 4 New Vegas. Come hell or high water, we'll find a way.
Sounds good.
The biggest issues right now, speaking to just creature creation, are basically just things that need custom behaviors written for them, because I'm sure you're very well aware, there are no publicly available behavior tools, so we're working to reverse engineer that on our end so we can come up with something.
Yeah, it's such a pain in the butt. Yeah, you pretty much you can try and work out of Excel sheet or XML files and try and reverse engineer it that way, but man, is that a beast.
Yeah. We're lucky in that we have a number of people who are familiar with the way Havoc handled all that.
Okay.
And we have people crazy enough to dig into it, but at the same time, it's going to take time.
Right. But I think that would be. I think most of the stuff has made it forward. Is there, aside from are there any key ones that are gonna hold you up? So if you say you get close, so say you're at 90% complete, and you want to stick to your word that if it was in New Vegas, let's make it into Fallout 4 New Vegas. Are there any particular bugaboos that you're looking at that are like, oh man, this is gonna crush us, or that maybe those same ones could be like, all right, you know what, players would probably be okay if we skipped it for now to get to release?
The biggest one that is kind of a non-starter, we needed to finish Fallout 4 New Vegas, is the Securitron. It's so
Mm.
behaviorally unique that there's not really anything that'll, in a satisfying way, mimic its behavior in Fallout 4.
Oh, and that's such a key one. Yeah, that's such a because it's like defines the it's almost the mascot of New Vegas.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a bummer. That's a cool one too. I believe somebody, I think M150 maybe did one where they made a variant of it in Fallout 4, but it doesn't quite match up. Especially when you figure the face needs to do its little thing while it's talking, its little animation on there. I don't know how you would do that. I guess you could do that with material files, but
Yeah, that's actually one of the easier parts of it,
okay. So it's literally just
which
it's
may
just getting
actually
that.
speak to how
Oh, go ahead.
that might actually speak to how difficult the rest of it is. But
Right, right. But yeah, it has a very particular way it moves, where it seems like it kind of, it just its motion is really, it feels really good in New Vegas, and you wouldn't want to lose that. In fact, if anything, you'd want to improve on it.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. I could see that one definitely being a deal breaker. As far as is there anything else on the technical side that's got you guys hung up that's gonna slow things down as far as trying to get that faithful recreation?
there's minor things that really they're not impossible. They're just extra work because they're not a priority right now. And they're some of them are even just nice to have things. It's stuff like there's the whole bullet counted reloads
Oh
because
yeah.
while a scripted solution is okay, it breaks a lot,
Yep.
and we'd rather not ship something that's half functional.
Right.
And alongside that, you have stuff like, weapons being visible on NPCs, and there has been a fantastic proof of concept released on the Nexus just a short while ago. But even then, that's not quite at the stage where we can say, yeah, slap it in, we can ship that.
Right.
So if we do anything with that, we'd want to have it just fully polished and ready to work.
Sure. Yeah, the bullet counter animations. I actually wrote one of the scripts, and it's wonky at best. It's just anytime you're doing anything that needs to happen in real time, you just can't rely on Papyrus for it. It's just not worth
Yeah.
it. Yeah, so that's I don't. Yeah, I think that's going to require custom behavior files most likely. So more reverse engineering for your team.
Woo.
That's always exciting to hear. Yeah, I don't know how to explain to people how rough the reverse engineering behavior stuff is, but there's no way to do it unless you've got some sort of background in the animation, or if you've looked into the files themselves. It's kind of a mess. It's actually shocking that they stopped there, though, like that they didn't allow that to be more open, because they did such lengths. Like the subgraph system in Fallout 4 is incredible. Like that is so
Yeah.
awesome that we can inject animations, but there's just certain, like, basically it's like we can inject the animations, but we can't inject triggers for animations, and that is a problem. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm willing to bet that all boils down to just Havoc not wanting to play ball with parts of it.
sure. Yeah, I mean that
Because
almost. I think that, and I wonder if that was what inspired their decision to do the subgraph system anyway. Is the fact that Havoc got pulled off of the free market, like it got bought up by Microsoft and then became a big license thing where it was like, all right, well now we can't give out the tools for free anymore, so it's not going to be useful for modders, but we still want to see custom animations, because despite their current track record of chasing microtransactions, Bethesda has done a lot to make sure that their games are super moddable. And so
100%.
I would not be shocked to find out if they were like, all right, well, how are modders going to be able to add animations now into this Havoc system? And then that became a solution with the subgraphs. But obviously that left the problem with the behaviors. And then the same thing could be said about, I just lost my train of thought. There was another system in there that I was really blown away by, where I was like, this feels like they put this in here just for modders. Oh, it'll come back to me. But anyway, I feel like they've been going above and beyond to support modding of their games, and it's really cool to see. And I'm sure you guys are feeling it if you're trying to recreate an old game, because you have so many things where you have this pressure on you to get it in a very specific way. Whereas most of us, when we're modding Fallout 4 or any of these games, we tend to just let the limitations bend us a little bit. But you guys have some high standards to keep up to, where maybe you have to force the engine to bend instead.
Yeah, and I mean, more often than not, the engine plays ball with us, and when it doesn't, the way I kind of look at it is, for about 2 years after Fallout 4 came out, there was kind of a common mantra throughout parts of the community, which were, we're never going to get pump-action shotguns because we can't do animations for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then
And yet, with time, it came.
right. Yeah, the other one I've been waiting for, and I know it's possible. We just need somebody to take the time to solve it. Is dual wielding. I think that's absolutely doable in the engine. Just requires the appropriate patience and attack. I think as soon as, especially if you guys. So here's another thing that I've seen that's awesome about your team, and with the release of your assets as you go, is you guys also seem to be open to sharing information and releasing things that could be helpful to the community. So, for example, if you guys were able to come up with a solution for behaviors, is it feasible that once you had that workflow systemized, that you'd release that information so that other people could take advantage of it?
100%. There are so many other projects and individuals who would benefit from that. We'd be crazy not to release it publicly, because blowing that open would just be a huge help to the entire community.
Yeah, absolutely. We just see cooler stuff around the board. And then a lot of times I've noticed there's a lot of projects tend to be very open with sharing stuff with each other. So it's like, you know what, we solved, for example, I brought up the centaur problem. Of the, that's a creature that shows up briefly in New Vegas that you want. Like, if another project happens to need that more prominently and they finish it, then it's a good chance that they share it with you guys. So then you're not having to redo work that's already been done, and that type of thing is awesome to see, especially as the community matures. Because I see this with every one of the Bethesda games, is over time what you tend to see is there's just a monster crap load of mods that come out early. And then just only a relatively small handful of people stick around for the long haul and are continuing to release and support mods for years. And those people tend to create this awesome little community where the mods all tend to interact nicely, and there's a lot of asset sharing. It's really cool to see that form over time.
Definitely. We aim to cooperate with anybody we can. We're doing a lot of stuff that a lot of projects that are either working towards a more nostalgic feel or, just want to do some cool mechanical stuff. There's a lot of crossover between us. So if we can not double up on work, we might as well do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because when you think about it, at the end of the day, players are going to be trying to cram all these mods together anyway. So it's like, all right, well, then why make them also download all these files twice? If we can find a way for them to all to work together. I mean, I know that it ends up being that they do have to download them all twice anyway, but the point being is that then, especially when you start doing it that way, if you've got somebody who's focused on a particular system and they're making improvements to it, if your system made use of theirs as well, then you gain those improvements automatically, and players end up with a better experience overall. So it's your team has less work to do, and players get a better experience. It's win-win all around.
100%. And that's one of our big goals. We're trying to crowdsource and share knowledge where we can. When we formed this project, one of our big sort of, another cornerstone for us was, this is a team to learn stuff, to work things out, and then to disseminate that where we can.
Sure.
And to this day, we try to keep to that where we can.
That's fantastic. Here, I've gone into this with a similar approach, is because what I've found in modding, all games I've modded, is that you tend to get groups like yours, like there tends to be open source, let's share everything groups, and then you also tend to get some tribal groups who are just like, this knowledge was hard fought and I don't want to share it openly. I want to make use of it for my own thing first, and then maybe I'll share it. That always made it seem kind of hostile to join into a modding community for some games that I've been a part of, and it's nice to see. So far in my experience, Fallout 4 has been very, very open. Like, very few people who are kind of clutching knowledge or anything like that.
Yeah, no, it's really nice to see. I've seen that on and off over the years in different games that people are modding, and the openness of this community is kind of refreshing in its own way.
Yeah, it really is. Well, and we're dealing with an interesting point in this game's life cycle. So Fallout 3 went through this. Of when New Vegas came out, it kind of split the community. And with Fallout 4 and then 76, I feel like we've almost had a strengthening of the community, because it was like, okay, well, Bethesda's basically abandoned us for multiplayer. This is our last bastion for 10 years. And it feels like there was a resurgence. Like, after 76 was announced to be multiplayer, people played it for a month or two, and then all of a sudden, to me at least, it felt like there was a boost in productivity. Like, all of a sudden we got another burst of new mods. A lot of people on the team became more active. Players started coming out of the woodworks to download again. Did you guys feel a similar energy?
A lot of people on our team weren't super interested in 76, and the sort of group of people we tend to interact with, aside from, of course, some people who really love their multiplayer games, weren't super following 76. So we didn't initially notice anything. But then some extra interest and some activity within the community and within our applicants started to bubble up from it. It was kind of a weird thing to be almost caught off guard by it, because we were like, 76 exists, but it's not a huge deal in our eyes.
Yeah.
To suddenly seeing that it's having very strong knock-on effects on just the overall community.
Yeah, I think it like inspired. I think it's a combination of inspired people to be interested again in Fallout, to be like, oh yeah, I forgot about Fallout. I haven't played that in a while. I would love to have another experience. And then they're seeking it out because they didn't get it from the 76 formula. To also the I think a lot of other, at least again, this is what I saw, is a lot of people had that had realization of like, oh, this is our fault. Like that's the last Fallout we're gonna get for a long time. Like think about the gap between Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. It's going to be probably even longer than that, because like if you look at, they've got another game coming before Elder Scrolls 6, and Skyrim was in 2011, so they're already up to, it's been, I think it was 2011, right?
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
Yeah, so they're already 8 years out, and they still have a game coming in between, which means it's probably going to be 10 to 12 years between franchise installments, which is pretty nuts. Like that seems like such a fiscal misresponsibility to do something like that, but I guess it is what it is. It's their brands. I was actually a little bit disappointed by that. I would have loved to see some more New Vegas action happen, where they outsource the material in their engine and be like, here, go ahead and build City X and give players that experience, because that was such a fun diversion, and a shocker too that it came out so quick after Fallout 3.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would be complaining if they saw Bethesda taking another step in that direction. I know we talk about it every now and then internally, and we're like, it'd be neat. We wouldn't abandon the project or anything for it, but it'd definitely be cool to see what they do with the engine. I know a lot of our people, when the 76 beta went out, a lot of people were super excited because they're like, look at this, they have the Enlightened lighting engine built into this, and for the unfamiliar, that's the Unreal Engine lighting engine, and they're using that for their exteriors in 76 now. And we were all sitting there like, oh man, this is super neat. It's awesome to see them able to interface this with the engine.
Right. Yeah,
got a lot of people thinking about what we can do to mimic those appearances, because some of the stuff they do looks really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the exterior stuff is really the big improvement they made on the engine that round. And I know that like there are plenty of really terrible screenshots of 76 and some of the stuff that looks pretty wonky, but the draw distance, the remote weather systems, their lighting, like in certain spaces, just look incredible. Like it gives you this really like they almost look like paintings from afar when I've seen a lot of shots of 76.
Yeah, some of that game is genuinely beautiful, and that got a lot of our level design lead is completely insane, and that immediately just lit a fire, and soon new things were coming out. It did a lot for sort of internal inspiration, sort of hey, if they can pull this off in the engine, we can probably do it just as good without an extra lighting engine bolted on.
Right. Well, you can do some pretty incredible stuff with the script extender, which I assume you guys are tagging into that, right? Because you need it for
100%.
the level up. Yeah, you need it just for the level up menu. You absolutely have to have that.
It's no understatement to say that without the script extender, Fallout 4 New Vegas would not work. It would not exist.
Right. Well, without it would have to be butchered down to almost nothing of what it looked like. I mean, it would have to. You could probably do the story with like the quest mod part of it, but there's too many parts of New Vegas's feel that are going to rely on that. Like the level system for War 1 is definitely, you absolutely have to have that to break free of the. That's actually one of the more disappointing sides I saw with Fallout 4, and I'm hoping that they change their tune for their future mods, is what a closed system their UI is. Like that's such a bummer when everything else is so open.
The UI in Fallout 4 is actually really robust if you start digging in and want to really play with the Flash stuff.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's no secret that we're going to redo the UI for Fallout 4 New Vegas. We're actually remaking the Fallout 3 and New Vegas UI.
Okay.
And the fact that it's modular in that sense and that we can actually hook in and just build a brand new UI is fantastic.
Right. I guess my perspective of it, though, is that then you are limiting other people's ability to edit the UI. So it's almost like you get one of these UI files, as opposed to something more like what HUD Framework created, where you have a template where everyone can inject into. That's kind of what I would love to see Bethesda put into place, is have something like that standardized, so that we could all be adding our own bells and whistles to improve the UI instead of having to do patching. Like I hate patching so much, because it's such a poor user experience to have to come up with all these patches and put all these mods together. And unfortunately, the UI is still in such a situation where that's a necessity.
No, 100%. It's one of the reasons we're not super big on doing like a beta release for Fallout 4 New Vegas.
Sure.
Needing to support something like that is going to be a nightmare on the user's end. It's going to be a nightmare on our end. And the reality of publicly sourced quality assurance is that it's typically not assuring a whole lot of quality.
No, it is. I mean, it's definitely. I think it's a great way to get that final layer of polish on it. But I think that most of the actual structured bug testing of technical issues, I think, yeah, that's definitely better handled internally than trying to do that publicly. But I will definitely say that the community has found some very niche bugs that I never had found on my own, regardless of how thorough I was in my own testing. So I will say that crowdsourcing the last 1% is probably a good move. But yeah, I can't. But that's what you do. That's pretty much what post-release is, right? Like that's what those additional patches are. Is you grab all those little tiny things people found that you never dreamt up. Or I think one of the most common ones we find are once you get later into the development, you know what's supposed to happen, so that's just what you do as you're playing. You don't go double check these things you fixed a while ago to see if they're wrong. But players, on the other hand, will try and break everything for whatever reason.
No, it's definitely, like, I don't mean to say it's useless,
Right.
but it's not a great way of doing like your proper testing on something.
Sure.
It's more something you'd run after the fact to start really hunting for weird issues when things are really polished up.
Right. But you guys, I mean, you're not anywhere. I mean, like you said, you're only 80% of the world space is touched, and you didn't even talk about how deep that is. So it sounds like you guys are nowhere near. Even if you wanted to do public beta, you're nowhere near where that would be realistic anyway. As far
Heavens
as
no.
Yeah. So I don't think that's anything anybody's clamoring for, really. But you guys if you have 150 people touching it, even if you're including voice actors, that's a hell of a lot of people that you have available that you can throw at builds at to try and get down to work out some of the major issues in advance. So
Definitely.
So let's talk voice actors. So that was one thing that came up, I think, bubbled up into the community news at one point, was both your project and Capital Wasteland basically at the same time realized that Bethesda was no longer cool with using assets, and Tale of Two everyone keeps citing, myself included, Tale of Two Wastelands as a way to get around it. Is that they basically built a method for extracting the files from your computer and reusing those, and a lot of people were wondering, why can't you do that same thing with this project? Because, obviously we can write utility files to do anything. Like, we have enough experienced programmers in the community. You could write something to extract out those files, convert them to the new format. Like, you could do all that dynamically. It's not impossible. So what happened with Bethesda, and what were some of the reasons you guys are now forced to do this crazy, ambitious, and I love the fact that you guys are doing a project to re-record all of the voices? What happened there? Can you tell the story from your side?
Well, basically, I think it would have been early last year now, and we were basically just given the whole heads up that, this isn't okay. You cannot be reusing our files, and you 100% need to go and either, re-record or find some alternate solution. Now, it's worth noting that our plan had never been to redistribute Bethesda's files. They were explicitly telling us we were not allowed to extract their files for users, which means we cannot produce like a tool, which we had at that time actually made, to go in, pull out all the New Vegas voice acting, and then deposit them in the Fallout 4 New Vegas directory. Huh. Now, I know at this point is where you go, wait a minute, but what about Tale of Two Wastelands? They did that.
Yeah.
They didn't, and this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
Tale of Two Wastelands copies the archive files from the directories over to the shared one so that it can load them in. That works fine because Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas use the same Bethesda archive format.
Okay.
Fallout 4, on the other hand, has its own version of the Bethesda archive format, which is not compatible with Fallout New Vegas's.
Interesting. I'm actually, what's really puzzles me about it is how they're able to legally even have any ground there of you. They're telling you that you can't allow your users to manipulate files they own on their own computer. That seems like that's outside of their privy. Like that the only reason you have to acknowledge that is you just want to be, do it in good faith because they asked you to. But it seems like they would have no legal bearing to stop such a thing from existing.
The end-user license agreement for both Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4 do say in them that outside of permissible use, you are not allowed to extract their files or create tools to extract, or the language used is decompile. Now, there are allowances made in some countries or in the EU for that to say it's allowed.
Okay.
However, we don't have the budget to take ZeniMax to court and say, yo, let us mess with your stuff.
Right.
And we have a decent relationship with Bethesda. We'd rather not chuck that under the bus.
Yeah, it seems like an odd move. I guess they're trying to hold the door open for themselves to be able to do remakes in the future. Like that, they've definitely seemed to have been taking more of a financially centered approach to game development over the last few years. Like I think they're kind of a powerhouse in the game industry. Is as far as they've got some pretty big licenses behind them, and they've been making moves to grow their studio. So maybe it's just a matter of that, or they want to keep that door open for themselves. Because we actually had, and this is a story I've never said to many people, but at one point we were in contact with the voice actor who did Three Dog to get him to reprise his role in a little quest thing we were working on, and we basically, both him and Bethesda, were just like basically he was like, I will do it if you can get me permission from Bethesda. Bethesda said, we can't give you permission to do that, but you are welcome to do it as long as you're not making him the actual character. So it was almost like this weird legal thing. They were doing this little legal dance.
That's entirely what it is. They licensed out, or not licensed, they contracted with the voice actors via the Voice Actors Guild.
Yeah.
Which puts a lot of really weird restrictions on who can reprise a role and the requirements for reprising that.
Yeah.
We had the same issue with bringing back voice actors for Fallout 4 New Vegas. As well, we have sort of an issue with, let's say, we want to use the voice acting for Doc Mitchell. Basically, Bethesda is telling us we can't extract it and reuse it because their license for that only extends to Fallout New Vegas. Right. That's why if I'm using New Vegas, I could, edit his files and redistribute, my Nightcore remix of your character creation.
Right.
But at the same time, if I were to do that for Fallout 4, it's not allowed.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. It almost, I think one of the things that doesn't get spoken about much in that regard is the fact that I think there's a shift in the business model of the gaming industry, in that with all of the big titles being free to play now, is that and people have heard me harp on this over and over again, and it's such a weird place to be at, is the fact that mods are effectively competing with AAA game space now, in that it's all an attention market space. Is that everybody has so much attention available, so much time available, and we're competing on that footing now because, well, first of all, the tools have become available that it's very easy to produce very high quality stuff as a hobbyist, but also because now the players aren't just like, if players want free experiences, they don't just go to mods, they also can go to major games. So we're all kind of in the same market space now, which might be another reason that Bethesda is like being a little more tense with the permissions.
It's certainly possible. I can remember when I got into modding, almost 13 years ago now, like sort of taking my first looking at it, or when I started picking up 3D 14 years ago, the tools available to us were not great. And the standards among the hobbyists out there were not super high.
Right.
And even jumping ahead 10 years from now, the barrier to entry had dropped and the standards had just skyrocketed.
Right.
So I don't doubt that in one bit.
Yeah, the standards are really what it is, because that's why we're on the same footing, is that players would come to mods and be like, okay, it's a free experience, so I can accept a little lower quality. But now there are just like major titles completely free where you get this really polished experience. So then the sell is no longer the fact that it's free. Now the sell has to be in the content itself. So then they're going to expect, so players are coming in, at least new players. I think all the old hands who have been playing with mods for a long time have a little bit of a buffer, and they'll allow for some mistakes and stuff, in the sense that they're just like, it's a mod, it's cool. But I think any new players coming into the modding space are just like, why would I play that garbage? It looks like crap, or it feels wrong, when I can just go play free game X over here. So the free factor is no longer on our side either, which is it's just a weird thing, and that kind of drives up the quality requirements.
No, 100%. I mean, you had that weird period right after the original Doom came out, when for a very brief window, modders were basically competing with game developers because they were using literally the same tools.
Right.
And then that stopped, and you started to see, like, I'd say from maybe 2001 to like 2007, everybody was kind of just playing around with tools. I mean, you had Gmax, which was not ideal. If you had lots of money, or you were okay with using, LimeWire to steal a copy of 3DS Max,
right,
you might have that. But it wasn't until maybe 10 years ago where suddenly everybody was starting to get their hands on good tools and was starting to really learn how to use them.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then a lot of the free tools are actually becoming pretty close in quality to the mainstream stuff. Like Blender is very impressive now compared to where it was a few years ago.
100%.
But yeah, I remember the only reason I happened to learn 3D Studio Max was a teenager because my cousin was in college for school at it, so he gave me his license key, because back then they didn't have quite as restrictive licensing. So I remember I got lucky to be able to learn it forever ago when it was insanely expensive. Like, it used to be, you like, to play around with 3D Max in the late 90s, early 2000s would have cost you a fortune if you weren't a student.
Yeah, no, I can remember. I first picked up Gmax back in, I want to say, early to mid 2003.
Yeah.
And that was off what was a PC Maximum magazine. And they had this awesome hover police car on it. And they had a tutorial in the magazine for how to use Gmax, and it was a limiting piece of trash. But
hey, it was better than
oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's actually, now, the thing that I forgot about a little while ago in the conversation. That was the other thing that I was like, okay, they did this just for modders. Inside of the creation kit, you get a exporter to make NIFs, and if you look at it, a lot of it is in a lot of the characters and the titles and stuff are in Chinese. So to me, that screamed of, I wonder if they weren't allowed to release the tool kit they had from Havoc, so they sourced out a version of it that they could give out to modders. That's what it appears to me. Because that's,
I'd never thought of that, but I think you'd have a point there.
Like, because it's such a weird thing to be like, why would you leave those titles in a foreign language? But then it's like, all right, I know you can do a lot of software outsourcing to China, and I was like, okay, well then that makes a little more sense there, because why would they have done it in-house like that? And I know, like, the Havoc thing was kind of a blow for them, I think, as far as modding goes, because like now, because of that NIF exporter, one of the things a lot of us are, well, I know some of you guys have figured out ways around it, but for a lot of stuff, especially with Collision, we're kind of trapped in 3D Studio Max 2013, which unfortunately last year was discontinued by Autodesk, so you can't even buy it legitimately anymore, which is insane. Like that, it's slowly going to be impossible for modding Fallout 4 without sailing the seven seas, as it were.
Yeah, we got a lot of people just clutching preciously onto their copy of Max 13, hoping that nothing happens to their hard disk.
Yeah, I know, that's kind of that's where I'm at. I have a copy of it legit, and it's like, oh man, when this hard drive goes, it's gone. I'm not gonna be able to get another license, or I'm not gonna be able to reinstall it again. So that's gonna be sad. But that'll be that will have some sort of limiting factor, I think, on the lifetime of how long we see mods for. But I think also that this community is talented enough that if that were to start to become a real problem, that we would see a community solution of all emerge. Like somebody would come up with a Blender collision creator or something like that, or a better method for generating collision, so that we weren't locked into this ancient software that is required.
Yeah, I mean, something I've noticed, I only really got into the Fallout 4 modding scene with Fallout 4 New Vegas. Before that, I'd kicked around sort of the periphery of Skyrim and such, and had done other games in years gone by. But something that has always struck me is the speed with which this modding community fixes problems and just iterates on things. You look at something like SimCity 4, one of the most modded games ever, and they're only this year getting an exporter for their content for Blender. Up until February, I believe, of this year, everybody was still using Gmax, a piece of software that was discontinued not by Autodesk, but the company that owned Max before Autodesk in 2005.
Yeah, and SimCity 4, God, that's an old one. That's been out for a minute. So yeah, for them to just get those tools just now, that's pretty crazy. But yeah, I attributed somewhat jokingly in a conversation I had with somebody recently that the reason that we get tools so fast is because of Lovers Lab, because there's some dedicated fans out there who are like, I'm gonna make this work, and they bust out some really crazy tools and solve some problems that otherwise wouldn't get solved.
I would be lying if I said we don't have Lovers Lab content in Fallout 4 New Vegas. They are a cornerstone of the Fallout 4 New Vegas experience. You heard it here first, folks.
Oh, that's so funny. But more power to them. I'm glad that they have found a passion and they're able to tear apart this engine and give us cool toys. So speaking of cool toys, what is the next release we can expect in like micro packaged content? Do you guys have any weapons or armor that are on the way that we can expect to see? Because you guys have done a pretty good job of capturing some of those old classics, like to the point where some days when I'm playing Fallout 4, I forget that I'm I'm not in New Vegas because I have so much stuff on my character that's just like throwbacks.
Well, Toasty Fresh, one of our 3D artists, very prolific, has a number of new toys in the works. Some things we've showcased might be coming soon. I know something we've spoken about in the past about getting a public release is his take on the 10mm pistol.
Oh, cool.
He has done a lot of work on redesigning that thing in small ways just to make it feel more like a believable real handgun that you might actually see. Something we may do in the future is a release of some of our environmental props for people who like to build settlements, or we might even do a small scale replace for some interior locations to sort of bring back the older style environmental assets in Boston. Call it a rope to the past, so to speak, to tie the games together.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you guys going to do anything? Are you doing a completely independent experience, or are you going to do Tale of Two Wastelands style where there's you can take a fast travel to get over to New Vegas and play with your same character?
Fallout 4 New Vegas launches from the main menu as a brand new game.
Oh, okay, cool. And I guess you kind of have to do that with the UI overhaul, total skill set change. It wouldn't make it would be pretty awkward for your Fallout 4 character to make their way over there.
Theoretically, you should be able to play Fallout New Vegas or Fallout 4 with Fallout 4 New Vegas installed.
Okay.
But it's going to break some stuff.
Sure.
And it's going to be an unbalanced nightmare. We're not even going to pretend it's meant to work.
Somebody, I think that feels like since you guys are planning on making it open-ended, inevitably somebody will release such a thing, because there's this weird obsession we have with playing Bethesda games where we want our characters to be able to just like live on indefinitely, and the best way to do that is to have a handful of overhaul mods installed so that there's just like infinite content to explore.
It would certainly be quite an undertaking. We've changed or tweaked so much that a lot of Fallout 4's base functionality just doesn't play nice with things we've done without some adaptation.
Sure.
But it is 100% doable, and I'd be really excited to see it done.
Yeah, it would be really cool. That was excuse me. Yeah, that would be one of the exciting things to see, because I find when I go back and play a Bethesda game, I install a bunch of those, and I never actually finish all of them in a single playthrough, but it just feels good that they're there, because it's just like, all right, there's so much more world to explore. I barely scratched the surface, and that there's something about that feeling that feels really good. And it's like, that's why one of the exciting parts about rolling new characters is just like thinking about how many possible things there are for you to do with that character. It's really awesome feel that Bethesda games bring.
Yeah, it's something we've always kind of had at the back of our minds while working on Fallout 4 New Vegas. The idea that every bit of content is something that a player just might not see, but the value in them finally seeing it will make them much more worthwhile if we execute on it very well.
Yeah. So
even the minor things deserve a pass.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I think you see a lot in even Bethesda has gone this route of modernizing the game experience to where you can see they put all of their eggs in the centralized basket. And I guess I get it, because you're thinking for the majority of players. So like if you move, they move 5 million copies of Fallout 4 or whatever. I think they did substantially more than that actually. The vast majority of them will play at one time. And then when you start thinking about that, then it diminishes the desire to do all that polish on things that most players won't see. You can kind of see that happening where we went a lot more linear with their quest layouts. Like obviously they had the big choice of choosing a faction, which was huge. Like that's a really big deal that Bethesda moved in that direction. That took a lot of effort. I know people think that's kind of like it doesn't feel like enough of choosing like you might have had in New Vegas, where you've got choices of how to execute a lot of different quests in a big way, which mad props to Obsidian for doing that. But being able to do stuff like that, it magnifies the workload substantially. Each time you add one of those branches, it's just like that much more work you've got to do to finish up the game path.
100%.
And I think most RPGs tend to just get rid of that. They're just like, now they recognize that the amount of work that's going to involve if you're having to write, then if you say you give the player the choice between good and evil early, and then there's a major point at each of those stories at the Act 1 mark, and now all of a sudden you're up to 4 stories you've got to write. And then if at Act 2 each of those splits, then you're up to 8 more stories you've got to write. And like that's just the amount of work gets compounded, and I think people avoid that. And I get it, like especially when the production values are so high, that doubling the amount of work you got to do at high production value is serious business. I mean, because then you're talking about like you might take a game that you could do in a year and turn it into 5 or 6 years because you did so much doubling of your storyline. So anyway,
Yeah,
I
mean,
guess I went down that road.
That's something we bump into.
Talking about the differences in Fallout 4 and New Vegas is New Vegas seemed to have the ambition of committing to a lot more of that story branching, whereas Fallout 4 kind of eschewed a lot of that.
New Vegas may have committed just a tiny too much in some places, and you see it. And that's really a big part of our work, because we're really acutely aware that we're going to hit Beyond the Beef, which, sure, if you're not familiar, is the single most broken quest in New Vegas.
It's also one of the coolest quests.
Yeah, so it's going into that and saying, okay, this can go very wrong. Let's try to not break it.
So what is your plan for stuff like that? I mean, are you gonna? Because obviously we've got the unofficial patches out there for all these mods. Is your plan to change things where there would be loose ends and broken bits, not necessarily bugs, but just like combinations of events that could occur that would leave something in an unfinishable state? Are you going to resolve those with maybe some new dialogue or some new options?
Well, I mean, that would butt up against our no new writing thing, but there's a lot of cut content that tends to fill in those gaps in New Vegas, things they just didn't quite finish.
Okay.
And for cut content, our sort of watchword is how much effort. Because if something is, low effort but high impact and does a lot to make something feel better, or it's really worthwhile,
right,
we're pretty likely to look at it and say, hey, this is worth our time, let's remake this, even if it wasn't in the original.
Sure.
Whereas if it's something that's either very high effort, like a good example is Betsy the Brahmin was a cut companion from Fallout New Vegas. You were supposed to be able to get yourself a pack Brahmin.
Okay.
And there was a quest for it in Freeside where you'd buy this Brahmin, and then a few days later it would just up and vanish. And then you'd go back to Freeside, and the guy you bought her from would suddenly have a bunch of really high-quality adventuring equipment that looks suspiciously like yours, and a very familiar-looking Brahmin there. And you could resolve that quest to get Betsy for good, or wipe them all out, or whatever. And there's some tiny references still to it, like Rotface in Freeside will still mention that vendor being there, but he doesn't exist anymore.
That's awesome.
Something like that would require such an insane amount of writing, though, to get in.
Yeah. For
what is really a marginal bit of gameplay. It's, hey, you can carry more stuff. Congratulations. Right. We're not really sure that's a good use of time, so that's not the kind of thing we'd add.
Oh man, that sounds like a quest I want to make happen now. But yeah, that does seem like a lot of work to redo. So, I mean, that leads to the beyond the writing. You have this insane task of voice recording it all. So I imagine you are familiar with the workload. Can you tell us approximately how many dialogue lines you guys are going to have re-recorded, and how many voice actors are going to have to be hit in order to make this a reality?
Once you start stripping out duplicate lines and actually get a proper number, it sits around 50,000 lines of dialogue.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a ton. And the way we tend to look at it is we do not need the voice acting to finish Fallout 4 New Vegas.
Sure.
It is secondary to our core goal, which is remaking a game. So once Fallout 4 New Vegas, the game is finished, it will release with whatever voice acting we have recorded.
So
everything beyond that is secondary.
Are you using placeholders? Because that's one of the things that's interesting. So what we found when we do quest mods is it's best to work with a placeholder audio so that you can feel the pacing and everything and make sure that it plays well. Are you guys doing something like that, or do you not really need to because you're the writing standard? So it's not like you're not going to change pacing, so you can just kind of go with what's there.
For some things, we do use placeholders, mostly for debug purposes. It's like a good example. It's something that's kicked around on the internet a little bit. Is Mr. New Vegas has so many lines of dialogue, and people, like when the game first came out, there were posts on YouTube of people finding like weird little lines he said that took really specific conditions to trigger.
Okay.
For something like that, we need a debug feature in there because we don't have subtitles. We need to know what he's saying so we can double check to make sure he's saying the right stuff under the right conditions.
Right.
But on the other hand, NPC Jim, who has 5 lines and maybe he's a vendor, we probably don't need a placeholder for him.
Sure. So what is so you mentioned Mr. New Vegas. I was actually going to ask about that. Is the plan are you guys going to hire a Newman impersonator and just go that way?
We will probably, there's no probably, I guess
Newton.
Wayne Newton cannot actually reprise his role. And we don't really want to try to imitate Wayne Newton. That man has a voice that is just so distinctive.
Right. Yeah, you would
and a
notice all
demeanor.
those. You'd notice all the mistakes if like somebody tried to impersonate it.
Yeah, so we're better off going for something that maintains a feel while taking our own approach.
Okay. But your plan is you do want to have some sort of radio DJ, and are you going to use the same dialogue and just have a new voice actor do their own take on that role?
That's pretty much the plan. All of our voiceovers are done from the original script.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that'll be such a bizarre experience because I love the DJs. I think to me that was one of the best things Bethesda brought to the table with it, because it gives you a feel that the world is real. Like the fact that they would have a DJ and they need to be entertained, and then the fact that there's a character always in your ear who's responding to the things you do in the world. Like that's such a really cool feel and really makes the game come to life. So it's awesome to hear that you guys are going to bring that back. Because I always miss it when I'm when I'm doing Let's Play stuff. Is because I tend to have the radio off because I don't want all the YouTube copyright BS, and I miss having, even though Travis is kind of a putz, not having him comment on the world is kind of a downer. Like I love having those DJs on.
No, I can 100% agree with you on that. Going from even just our placeholders to dead silence, it's really almost oppressive in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely changes the tone of the game dramatically. Like the radio actually makes the game, it encapsulates the whole theme of the Fallout universe of having like this happy-go-lucky 50s paint over top of this horrible landscape. Is like that's the whole feel of Fallout, and like the radio makes it happen the whole time you're playing.
Yeah, it conveys again, so like what I was saying with Bethesda really nailing in Fallout 3 tone. It really pushes the tone of the game really nicely.
Yeah, absolutely love it. So that is fantastic to hear that he'll be coming back. So is that one of those release priorities? Like that will be one of the voices you wouldn't skimp on, other than maybe some of those obscure lines you said, because it's like, all right, well, how are we gonna, who's gonna trigger this? Maybe one out of 100 people.
You say that now, we're gonna have 500 people trying all the most obscure lines now just to see if we did them.
Yeah.
Even lines like that, like even Mr. New Vegas, despite being very important, he's not a priority for release.
Okay.
We have held true to the idea that Fallout 4 New Vegas will release without voice acting, and what it gets is what it gets.
Okay.
Because a lot of people, including members of our team, were concerned about the project being delayed by this.
Sure.
And it's understandable. And we don't want to risk people's work being held up because, we can't find 37 Yuri Lowenthal impersonators.
Right. So so how do you guys break up that kind of work? Because one of the things that's been interesting that I found working on Quest mods now is that you can almost have multiple parts of the development going in parallel, almost like a real dev studio, because so many of these things can remain independent for so long. That something like voice acting, we've always had it be kind of its own independent wing. Like we've been very fortunate to work with Kobus, who's well known among modders, especially in the Skyrim community, who's just kind of runs with it. Do you guys have anything like that?
Yeah, his work's
going
really
on?
good.
Yeah, he does really. He's got very a good ear for good actors and a high high standard. So he doesn't put up with low quality work. But do you guys have something similar going on with the New Vegas team? Do you have somebody who's like pioneer, I would say cowboying the voice acting side to try and get some of that done so that you do have some at launch? Or is it such a low priority that you're not even focused on it at all?
Fallout Team F4NV realistically is broken into two separate halves now. We have the core gameplay development side of the team.
Okay.
And then we have the voice acting team, which operates completely separate. One of the big things with that team is we need to rely on the applicants we get. Sure. As much as we can put out, requests for certain roles on like Casting Call Club,
right?
Those will only pull in so many applicants, and we need to take the applicants we have and work with the people who actually fit the roles we need.
Right.
As a result, voice acting comes in for the characters as we get it.
Right.
Beyond that, we kind of just let it happen while development carries on, following more established milestones.
Sure. That's a good approach. I think that's kind of what you have to do. It's a weird part of the project in that it's something that you want. It's almost like you can get away. It's a lot easier to get away with lower quality art than it is to get away with lower quality sound. It's like this weird psychological thing that And then the fact that you need a lot more players involved. So like one person could produce just a crap ton of art, but that same one person can't produce a whole ton of voice acting, or it'll sound too repetitive. So it's like this weird space of you need a lot of bodies, and then then you're also on top of it targeting specific voice types that you guys have I can see why that's a pretty huge task on your hands there.
Yeah, we're really lucky. Our audio lead is an absolute beast. He has a fantastic ear for voice acting. He knows his production just to a T, and on the side happens to be a fantastic composer. So we got off very lucky with him choosing to join our team.
Yeah, that I feel that's like a lot of the projects that seem to me like they're on the path of success. It seems like it's just been getting those right people together, because you need to have people with a certain talent level, but also the willingness to commit to multiple years to a project, which is it's not a common thing. Like, if you'd asked me to do that when I was younger, when I had all the time, I probably wouldn't have been able to, like, just because I don't know where life's taking me in my 20s. And then so it's like this weird thing of you've got to find people with enough experience, but also enough time, and then get them all to commit to the same project. It's a challenge when there's no money involved.
Yeah, it's always something we're acutely aware of, but we've just been so lucky, and I know a big part of it is the fact that it's New Vegas of all games, right?
Right.
So we have a lot of people coming in with a lot of strong feelings about that who really want to see it remade.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But even then, it is just surreal to see the amount of effort people are throwing at this project.
I mean,
it is just humbling.
Yeah, I mean, I would be very excited. It's got to be. It's such a different project to work on. Like a remake of a game is an interesting one in the fact that you almost have very obvious milestones of things where you can kind of feel your own success happening as you start to see the major set pieces and the major quest points and the major systems come into play. Of that, when they're complete. Like it's like when. For example, when if we're designing a new system for Sim Settlements, for example, we're not sure when it's complete, because it's kind of like, okay, well, here's a version that kind of works of what we had in mind, but is it good? You guys know what's good because you're recreating something. So it seems to me you would have some you'd have a lot more exciting moments in development of like, guys, look, we finished the dinosaur in what's that town? Novak, thank you. Of like stuff like that, where it's just like it's gonna hit that nostalgia high over and over again as you guys are working.
Yeah, there's certainly an element of that to it, and it's always really cool to say, "Hey guys, look at this thing I'm working on," and everybody looks at it, and it's some fantastic building that's really high profile, or it's a piece of clothing, and everybody knows exactly what it is and knows what it means for like our sort of overall status of completion and the overall completion of our world.
Yeah.
And everybody just gets super hyped up by it.
Yeah, that's awesome. If it weren't set like that, one of the projects that's always inspired me, and I don't think it seems like such a pipe dream to ever happen, is the idea of remaking Fallout 2 in one of the modern game engines. And those are the type of projects that I always get hyped about, to the point I'm like, man, maybe I should join them and help them make that a reality. But man, those old Fallout games were so much bigger than the current games, given that you didn't have the limitations that you do of modern game development when you were doing limited voice acting and 2D sprites, and like now doing something of that size in 3D is mind blowing that people try to do it.
Tens of thousands of square miles of world space.
Right, it's like, oh my god, what's the matter with you guys? What are you doing? But more power to them. It would be pretty awesome to see some of those old games, because I'm a huge fan of. I remember being really annoyed by Fallout 1 because of its time limit on the main story, but man, Fallout 2 just drooling over that game for years.
No, they're both fantastic, and I know a lot of members of our team, when we're working on stuff for F4NV, we're always reaching back just a tiny bit, saying, ooh, here's a thing from Fallout 1, here's a thing from Fallout 2, is this of any use to us?
Well, yeah, especially if you've got effectively 25% more of the world space to work with, and the fact that you said that it's known that Obsidian didn't flesh out the desert as much as they would have liked to, just due to image limitations and time limitations on their side. So you guys have a lot of space that you could work with. Now, are you taking any of that space and just making some things feel less crammed, or because I don't remember ever playing New Vegas and feeling like things felt squashed together. I felt like, if anything, areas like Freeside were too open and too spread out, where you could have it seemed like there could have been a lot more content in there. What is your guys' approach for that type of thing, of divvying up this new space among all the areas of New Vegas?
It's really location to location. You look at, we recently released some tiny preview of Quarry Junction.
Okay.
And you'll notice that it is still very clearly the quarry, but we've made it much bigger and wider. And that really does help to sell it as the location it is. And it also happens to make it a far better combat arena for the Deathclaws down there.
I love that quarry. That was one of the places that really sells you that you're in a full open world, that you're allowed to go to this area that you have no business being in right away at the beginning of the game, and so it becomes like a natural barrier without them having to do, the old school way of invisible walls. Like that was one of those moments in New Vegas coming up to the quarry early on where it's like, okay, I'm going the wrong way, and the game's teaching me that by kicking my ass, and it felt awesome. So
yeah, no, it's really cool to see it functional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I take it then this is one of the other balancing issues, is that the creature balance in Fallout 4 is so much different than the past Fallouts. Like Deathclaws are not scary in Fallout 4 for the most part, but they were terrifying in the older Fallout games. Is that one of the things you guys are going to restore as well, of certain creatures being a little more deadly and intimidating in combat?
It's really ironic because statistically, Deathclaws in Fallout New Vegas are actually far weaker than the ones in Fallout 4.
Interesting, okay.
However, the way they were used was far more effective in New Vegas, and we get that as a crutch because we're doing the same thing basically.
Sure.
And one of the big helps for us is we have damage threshold.
Okay.
So you can't just dunk on a bunch of Deathclaws with a 22 pistol as much as you might like to try.
Right, but yeah, in Fallout 4, I guess you just spam any weapon long enough, and from a high enough vantage point, you're going to kill it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
okay. I think that's one of those like rose-colored glasses things where I just remember it more fondly, because I had a great experience without not understanding the underlying mechanics to why it would work better. So
no, it's a weird thing, like looking at it statistically, because in every way the Fallout 4 Deathclaw should just be a more effective enemy.
Right.
But simply from the way they use it in Fallout 4, where you're typically only fighting one in a space where it's easy for you to cheese them, and the game makes it really easy to cheese them.
Yeah.
You're never really in a situation like you are in New Vegas where you're just running and booking and hoping to God they don't catch up with you.
Right. Yeah, they all tended to be in like open world spaces, like big open flat spaces where it was just like you catch their attention and you're screwed.
Yeah,
that was definitely a different use. But I think also the lack of damage threshold definitely makes a difference too. And you spam any weapon long enough, like you get the minigun is a pretty ineffective weapon against in general, and the fact that you got to burn through a lot of bullets, but you throw enough bullets at something and it doesn't have much damage. It doesn't really have damage resistance in the same way. It's pretty easy to cheese it.
Yep.
Yeah. That's that stuff. You got me throwing. I'm like going through all these scenarios now in New Vegas in my head, remembering how fun that damn game was. But I had the same experience in Fallout 4 for different reasons, and that's why I've personally become obsessed with the game and continue to develop for it. Is like it was in the same way that Fallout 3 was a wonderful improvement over the earlier the 2D titles. I felt Fallout 4 had the same impact as over Fallout 3 in New Vegas. Of like they just improved so many systems. Was so excited to play through it. And the first time experiencing the story, I was enthralled by it. Like obviously now you see, once you start looking under the hood and stuff, it makes some of the story choices seem less meaningful and stuff. And I know all that. And a lot of people after playing it many times have figured that out as well. But the first time was such a great experience that anytime I can think about going through and having a fresh experience in Fallout, it gets me pretty excited. And so even though New Vegas isn't a fresh experience in that extent, just being able to combine that nostalgia with all these new gameplay elements is super. I mean, I can see why people are coming onto your team and they're just pumped.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, like, I've been here since this project kicked off, and every time we see something new or minor coming in where it's like, here's a thing that was in Fallout New Vegas, but maybe it wasn't executed on as well as it is in Fallout 4. Or, here's something that we can do because Fallout 4's engine is a marked improvement.
Yeah.
It is just the most exhilarating thing to see it just all working and just being better.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to be awesome. So there was one of the other things I wanted to ask you about in regards to that Doc Mitchell thing was you had a name of somebody on your video that caught my eye, which is Pandemic. And what did he? Because he had. So anybody who doesn't know who Pandemic is, he did this series of animations that you can find on YouTube, and they're kind of like almost. I don't know what you would call them. They're these strange cinematic things, and his final one he called Dream. And they're just almost like you watch them and they make you want to go replay Fallout 4. Like they're really, really well done. And with Dream, he did all these custom animations and whatnot. I saw his name on that Ain't That a Kick in the Head video. I assume he did the animations for Doc Mitchell's custom stuff. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Nice. Is he working with you guys? Because he clearly has some skills. That, like I said, that Dream video is one. Anytime I tell people ask me like if they should play Fallout 4, I send them that video a lot of times because I'm like, this is like such a way better sales pitch than what Bethesda gave us in their marketing.
Yeah, he worked with us up until a little while ago. He actually departed the entire Fallout 4 modding scene.
Okay.
After some time, however, he did work with us for a good chunk of time prior to that.
Oh, okay. So then you guys have a lot of the animation pipeline figured out, so you're going to be able to pull off a lot of what you need to do to match. Obviously, you talked about the behavior issues, but there's still a lot more to animation that you can do even without the behavior fixes that's probably going to have to happen in order to pull off some of the scenes and things in New Vegas. Do you guys have all of that stuff under control?
We 100% do.
That's awesome.
We have quite a few people working with us who know how to animate or are crazy enough that they're learning how to animate right now on the fly. Okay. We've worked with numerous animators from throughout the community. Everybody from, War Daddy to the Rizzler have all contributed animations to F4NV at one point.
Oh, that's awesome. Because that's one of those unicorn skills in the community where there's only a handful of people that know it, and then of them a smaller subset who do it well, to where it's one of those places where it's easy to have a lack of polish in mods is animation, because it's such a high demand or it's such a demanding skill set in knowledge. Like you have to have a lot of experience to do it well. Some of those names you've named, I think all of us have heard of them, and we know their work is fantastic. So it's cool to hear that they're getting involved in there, just to make this experience seem more polished. Because that's the other thing is I think, like you said, early on, you set the bar with that demo video, and like I personally want to see, I want to see what New Vegas looks like on a modern engine. And even though people probably could meme that's Fallout 4 is not exactly a modern engine when compared to what a lot of the Unreal stuff looks like, but by comparison to New Vegas, it will feel super modern. And stuff like those animations and whatnot is just going to go a long way towards selling the whole thing, and that experience like you were talking about of making people forget about any of the rough edges or about the fact that the experience is a little bit different than maybe what their memories serve them.
Definitely. And I mean, we're lucky in a lot of ways, especially with the way Bethesda handled the development of New Vegas, or not Vegas 4, because New Vegas has a lot of, they have areas that should be very visually stunning, but because it was in the old Gamebryo iteration of the engine, they're not fantastic, and they really don't hold up these years later. Mm-hmm. Fallout 4 has some really fantastic visual effects that Bethesda basically didn't use. You have stuff like screen space reflection. Right. They used it in a single place and then nowhere else, despite the fact it has almost no system overhead. Right. And it's a fantastic reflective visual effect.
Yeah, there's a bunch of systems that we've found that the game is capable of expanding on and doing some really cool stuff that they didn't do. And I wonder if part of that is just like their engineers got ahead of the content team, where they're just like, hey, we could do this with these, but then the content team didn't have enough time to like really wrap their heads around it to make use of it. That would be my best guess, because there's quite a few things that we've been able to, that we're working on, that we've pulled off, where it was just like, why didn't Bethesda do more of this? It wasn't that hard, but you could easily see. I mean, I think I've done the same thing with like over-engineered the code in my frameworks to where, and then like you see almost nobody in the community making use of it, and it's like, I think sometimes you're ahead. You can get ahead of the creators when you're designing engine stuff.
No, 100%. We've seen a lot of the same on our end. So that's not really something that would surprise me if it were the case.
So now, speaking of systems and whatnot, I know you guys have some very strong programmers on your team from the names I've seen dropped around. Are you guys doing anything that you're building that, for example, some of the systems that you're rebuilding, you've mentioned that you want to make sure things aren't done in a funky way. You want them to be moddable effectively. Are you doing the same thing in your code team? Are they going to be making any of the systems modifiable externally?
What we can realistically release as being a modular toolkit for users to use in Fallout 4, or so that they can be easily worked with in Fallout 4 New Vegas, we're doing. You might have seen the damage threshold framework was released.
Okay.
That literally allows anybody to add damage threshold to Fallout 4 if they so choose to do so.
Sure.
And it even includes tools to automatically convert every item in the game to support it.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, that's awesome. Because stuff like that will go a long way toward, you can almost have, and this is why I actually really hope somebody does do what we mentioned earlier about once, mods like Fallout 4 New Vegas and stuff come out, is come up with a way to combine all of them so that you can access them all with the same character, and then take the time to do all those overhauls on stuff like that. And again, this is where I think, this is the type of thing where I think passionate mod players end up creating, and why I'm super pro mod pack is like that is so inspiring and such an exciting premise to do a playthrough of something like that, of having all of those damage thresholds and all the skill systems and all this old stuff, and then apply it to not only Fallout 4, but then apply it to Miami, Cascadia, etc., all these other projects that are coming out, but at the same time take all the systems that are getting built in other mods, like for example one I'm about to ask you about is take stuff like Sim Settlements and make sure, and then go play with that in places like New Vegas. So that leads me to a question that I have to ask every one of these big project leads is, are we going to see some space set aside for settlements, and are you going to leave the vanilla settlement system in place so that all mods like Sim Settlements will just function in there naturally?
Out of the box, we're not adding any settlement locations. Player homes will be adapted to use something like home plate.
Okay.
But otherwise, we had to talk about it internally, and it basically boiled down to the fact that we didn't think it really fit the world for them to be present.
Okay.
You look at New Vegas, and a big part of it is fighting over places, fighting over resources. And you also, the Mojave's always talked up as being inhospitable, lethal, where people can live and eke out an existence is a very rare, safe place for them to be. So allowing the player to sort of carve out their own place like that, while certainly cool, and I can guarantee team members are going to be building mods to enable it probably the day of release.
Right.
It's not something that the core release is going to feature.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. I definitely, I remember distinctly there being farms in Fallout 4. There's a couple of places, and I remember a quest where you have to do something to help out some farmers. But yeah, they were it was few and far between. So, but I mean, just beyond that, even if you go outside of the idea of the settlement, of the building food and water and whatnot, of just being able to build structures, I think is such a powerful feature in the Fallout 4 engine that I think a lot of people are going to want to see that in New Vegas as well. In your take on New Vegas, of just being able to build stuff for the sake of like making a little part of that world space their own.
Definitely.
And fortunately, there are a lot of tutorials on making workshops. So if you guys, as long as you guys aren't planning on disabling the workshop parent script, or workshop parent quest, people will be able to add we'll be able to add settlements to New Vegas, Fallout 4 New Vegas very easily. It's a very simple process.
We essentially have no plans to actually touch it. We don't want to mess with it, make it harder to work with or anything.
Yeah.
Like I said, our sole interaction will be, mimicking home plate's behavior for player homes. Beyond that, we'd rather leave it open for anybody to play with if they'd like to.
Sure. So now this is a problem that has come up with a couple of the other big projects. What are you guys doing as far as DLC requirements? Are you doing the full Monty of you've got to have all DLC? Are you just doing vanilla assets plus the custom stuff you're making? What are you guys doing in that regard?
You will require all of the DLC for Fallout 4, as well as all of the DLC for Fallout New Vegas to play Fallout 4 New Vegas.
Interesting. Okay, so you have to have New Vegas. So what is it that's required from New Vegas in order to pull this off? Is it because there are some assets you're able to reuse? Like, what is the I know you can't do the voice actors, and you couldn't do the topography or the height map. So what is it that you can claim from New Vegas that you're allowed to use?
Absolutely nothing.
Interesting.
We're required to have players to have a copy of the game, though, because otherwise we're just giving away a copy of Bethesda's games to everyone.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. It's interesting that that's the distinction that they would make, like especially because that game. I mean, you can buy New Vegas for like probably $7 or something like that on.
It's on sale for $2 right now.
Okay. So it's like it's not exactly an investment. So it just seems like an interesting requirement to have. if you guys are making all the
No.
assets from scratch.
It's a little silly from some people's perspective, but it's a requirement, and it's not really a hard one to work with. We're going to be building an installer,
Yeah.
and built into that installer is a way for us to check whether or not you have a legitimate install of New Vegas. If not, game just doesn't install. Simple as that.
Yeah. It was my only argument. I mean, I guess for me, I would have the issue of the hard drive. I have an SSD hard drive for my games, and I don't want to give up 20 gigs for New Vegas. But that's a pretty small price to pay to be able to relive the thing. You can just consider that like an extra part of the Fallout 4 New Vegas install.
Well, I mean, if it's any consolation, once it's installed, you should have no problem uninstalling New Vegas.
Right, because you've proved it to the game. That's a funny requirement. So okay, so I guess the reason I was asking about the Fallout 4 DLC is there's a common issue that most of the teams have run into, and that's that once you load up the CK with all of the DLC, you find that there's this limit that Bethesda probably doesn't even realize is in their engine, and I'm sure they will remove in future titles, that the CK can't function anymore and won't save or allow you to create additional forms. It hits an arbitrary limit. It's probably some memory allocation mistake they made. What are you guys doing to solve this? So most of the other teams have gutted the ESMs in order to make themselves basically like working copies that they can load into the CK. Is your plan to keep all of the existing Fallout 4 stuff functioning with your mods so you're not actually having to edit those, or is there going to be some sort of gutting happening in order to sustain Fallout 4 New Vegas?
We have our own solution for dealing with that problem. We've actually found that the solution other teams are using may actually cause instability in the creation kit and further write issues when trying to merge in a master file.
Okay.
So, what we've actually done is a very simple workaround that abuses how BSAs work.
Okay.
Basically, what we can do is we extract all of our BSAs, and then what we do is we take and just create new forms in our master for whatever assets we need from the DLC, right?
Okay.
Once we've done that, with the archives extracted, we're able to work with those assets just fine. And when we distribute to an end user, because the archive file structure is retained when we made our own custom forms, our forms will still work, but it'll load from the archive instead.
Oh, yeah, okay. So we did that trick with our Project Blueprint mods, is we added snaps to a lot of the vanilla objects so that we could work with them in the game, but then players don't actually need them because our scripts place the items. So then we were able to just rely on them being in the same exact location, and they work just fine. Yeah, that's an awesome trick. So because you don't actually need the forms in the CK, what you actually need are the assets. So yeah, that's a great solution.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice and simple. So then, theoretically, like you said, players could boot up Fallout 4 New Vegas, and if somebody was so ambitious and wanted to have a way for the character to be sent to the Commonwealth, it would theoretically be possible because you're not going to have to remove anything from the base game. In fact, I know those other teams aren't either, but I'm always been curious if there's going to be any active disabling or messing with any of the quests or content that's in the base game that would result in some sort of conflict issue, some mod conflicts or experience issues in that regard. But it sounds like you're not going to have anything like that.
Theoretically, no. We can't make any promises. Some stuff will probably get broken along the way in the base game, but it won't be because we've started cutting content anywhere.
Right. But theoretically, if we install I obviously in the ideal situation this will be the case, and you guys won't know for certain until you're closer to launch. But ideally, if for those of us thinking down the line, we would run the Fallout 4 New Vegas installer, and we would launch from its own load screen. And then if we also wanted to, we could exit the game, launch it again, and just as Fallout 4 and play, and it shouldn't have any impact.
Correct. We actually have built our own launcher for Fallout 4 New Vegas.
Awesome. Because realistically, it's just a matter of you just load into Fallout 4 without the New Vegas ESP enabled. You guys aren't replacing any base files or anything, and should be all fine. I think the only issue usually with these mods that can cause conflicts in that regard, and you probably have it solved with your launcher, is the loose file issue. Is that once you get into certain certain replacements and stuff, you end up having to have loose files. Are you guys going to be doing a full are going to be able to do a full BA2 solution, or are you going to have some loose files to pull off everything you're doing?
We should, it currently is the case, we should be able to archive everything without any issues. Anything you typically use a replacer for it's typically to replace a material or an asset whole cloth, right?
Right.
with what we're doing, we can literally just make it a new asset with the Fallout 4 New Vegas prefix, drop it into our BA2, and call it a day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, because you guys are not pegged to the console limitations at all, thanks to the requirement on the script extender. So yeah, you guys can basically just do whatever you want there, and that's another wonderful thing about living in this time where we have so much bandwidth available. Is giving people just monster amounts of files is not a deal breaker anymore, like it would have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of nice to have that wiggle room to play with.
Sure, absolutely. So is there anything in particular that's come up during this development that shocked you about it, or was the project pretty straightforward coming from what you had worked with so far? So you had said you guys came from a project that failed, which I always I'm an ascriber to the belief that if you're not failing, you're not trying. Like that's definitely a part of developing and getting better at things. So the failures are not scary at all to me. But have you stumbled upon anything since you've undertaken this current project that was just like shocking to the way that the project ended up going, or maybe it was a massive hurdle that you didn't anticipate? Is there any crazy encounters that you've run into in that regard, and the project as an overall thing?
Aside from the whole voice acting situation, honestly, we kind of built from day one for this project to, above all else, be survivable. So that things can go wrong, things can fail, people can leave, people can come and go as they need to, but the project will carry on development. And if worse comes to worse, we have plans in place in case the whole team does, get disintegrated, or, all decides to quit all at once.
Right.
So, with that being the case, nothing has really been a massive shock to the system for us.
What about on the other end of the system, of the fact that you have all of these new possibilities? Has anything changed or morphed in the project that where you're excited about, like where you're suddenly going to have this new thing we didn't have in New Vegas or in New Vegas mods that you're suddenly going to be able to bring to the table thanks to the new tech?
Something we're all kind of a big fan of is the weapon mod system. You can do so much more with it than the one in New Vegas, and the one in New Vegas had some serious clunkiness to it.
Yeah.
Not just from a user endpoint, but from a development endpoint.
Right.
So being able to use the Fallout 4 system, which I won't pretend is fantastic from a development perspective, but I'm not going to even try to, but the additional functionality it gives us a lot of room to build sort of new, what's a good way of putting this? It gives us a chance to give player builds more versatility and more options.
Sure. Yeah,
we're trying to make it so that players really can go weird ways with their builds that are still totally viable.
Okay.
And also make builds that weren't possible in New Vegas possible.
Sure.
Like survival.
Yeah, the weapon mod system is really, really powerful, and from a player's perspective, it works beautifully. Like it's completely seamless. And then, on the technical side, it seems a little. It feels very clunky to put it all together. Like it's so many parts that you have, so many records you have to build and things you have to think about. But the modular power of it is really impressive. I was especially one of the things that Bethesda didn't do much of, and I haven't seen a ton of mod authors take advantage of because it's so much more work, but is the fact that the modular system is so good that it can support alternate animations for any individual piece, so that and I've seen a couple of mods recently doing this where like the character holds the weapon in a substantially different way, and that's just such an awesome, powerful system that you can change everything from the projectile it's firing, the damage it does, its stability, even its animation, its material. Like literally one weapon could literally become anything else with the mod system. Like there's no, like you could keep absolutely nothing about the core weapon and make the whole entire thing completely. Like theoretically, somebody could release the one weapon to rule them all, where it was just a vanilla template that could turn into every weapon. Like that's totally possible with the skeleton that Bethesda built, which is again talking about the power of their abstraction and engineering that they did, and in the support of allowing modders to go nuts with their game.
Yeah, I know. For instance, when we released the service rifle last year, one of the mods on it converts it over to a 9mm submachine gun. And with that being the case, it's a real thing that they actually did with them, and it's super goofy. But that changes the animations on it, so you're using a smaller magazine. We have a lot of things we're going to be toying with that, because a lot of the weapons in New Vegas were distinct quote-unquote weapons, but they were really just, a variant.
Right.
With the New Vegas's weapons being moved over to the 4 system, we have a lot more opportunity to let players sort of mix and match bits and pieces there, which again gives more builds, more options.
Sure. Yeah, and one of the things with so this is one of the other things with the weapons that a transition came, and you've already slightly touched on this. I actually really like the way Bethesda went, but a lot of people like the way Obsidian was going, which was Obsidian was kind of grounding things more in reality. And so like they went with a more realistic take on their weapons, whereas Bethesda has now between 3 and 4 has shifted over to focusing almost entirely on making their guns feel less real. Like they want them to feel, they look good, but they're very distinct. They have a very distinct art style to them. They almost look, they have kind of a, I don't want to say cartooniness, but I guess it's kind of taking into that 50s vibe where they look almost like retro future, and they've really embraced that and kind of went away so that none of their weapons look distinctly like anything real, except for the one exception was the weapon they added into Nuka World. Their version of the AK looks pretty realistic, but most of their weapons are all intentionally kind of retro future, I guess is the term for that. Are you guys going to go back to, you're going to hark to New Vegas in that, like lean toward their art style of being more realistic and grounded in real world weaponry?
Yeah, our goal is generally to go for something a little more grounded.
Sure.
If you look at the world in New Vegas, it's really much more grounded than Fallout 3 or Fallout 4. And it would be kind of weird to have, the Fallout 4 assault rifle present in that world.
Yeah, that assault rifle is one of the goofier looking ones. But I personally am a huge fan of that just because it makes it more distinct, so it doesn't feel like I'm just playing Call of Duty X. Like, it's nice to have a very distinct feel across the board. That's one of my appreciations of the silly weapons. But yeah, it would feel disjointed with a lot of the tone and just the way they went with New Vegas. And also, if you're bringing back all those old mechanics and then to completely overhaul the art style would be kind of crazy. So it's just going to require you guys to redo a lot of work then to do that. Is you're not going to be able to lean on any of Bethesda's assets effectively for weapons, because not many of their things follow anything true to life that would fit in the New Vegas area.
Many of the weapons in Fallout 4 aren't really something we can use anyway because they don't really correspond to any Fallout New Vegas weapons.
Okay.
Luckily, where we do have crossover, it generally is usable.
Okay.
There are exceptions, but it's stuff like, your energy weapons. The designs didn't change a whole lot between the games.
Sure.
Or, there's only so many ways you can stylize a pair of brass knuckles.
Right. Okay, yeah, there's definitely some crossover in that. The melee weapons, the energy weapons definitely kept the feel. So it's a lot the ballistics. And then did they end? I don't think they put was the Fat Man ever in New Vegas? I don't remember having it, but
it was.
It was okay.
It was super rare, and ammunition was even rarer, but it was there.
Yeah, because I mean the Fat Man is one of those like over the top silly weapons that a lot of critics of Bethesda have said that like that goes against the whole point of what Fallout was originally trying to comment on was. And like having players then just throw them around like toys is pretty absurd, but it is a pretty fun weapon. So
100%.
Now did that I don't even remember having it in New Vegas, so I'm clearly just not enough of a New Vegas fan, or I just never was lucky enough to find one. But was the art of that substantially different? Because it seems to me I don't recall the animations for the Fat Man. It seems to me they were a great improvement in Fallout 4. Like the whole look and feel of that thing, like really feeling like a catapult, really came to its own in Fallout 4.
There was basically no changes in New Vegas from 3.
Okay.
So it's the kind of thing where we can just take it out of the box from Fallout 4 and run with it.
Awesome. So there's some assets you're able to keep. You just you're gonna have to recreate quite a bit. Are you guys doing full DLC coverage? Because I think there's a lot. Some of the DLC from New Vegas is regarded as some of the best content created for the Fallout games. It's just like the stories are so deep and there's like a lot of interesting stuff you get to do. Are you guys tackling that at launch or planning to post launch?
It's kind of a maybe. If we feel like going on to the DLC after we've, spent 20 years developing Fallout 4 New Vegas
right.
and, walking uphill both ways in the snow, we might decide to move on to it. But
Sure.
we will be giving a tiny taste of some of the DLC content in the base game.
Okay.
Some weapons and items that sort of make more sense in the base game than they do just being DLC exclusive will show up.
Right.
And a few perks that are really tailored towards the base game and only showed up in the DLC because that was how they introduced it to the game.
Okay.
That's the kind of stuff we're looking at adding to base Fallout 4 New Vegas.
Sure. Well, one of the ones that jumped to mind, outside of obviously the big world state ones, like something like the Sierra Madre would be pretty complex to develop. But I was thinking also in terms of like was it called the Gunrunners pack? The one where you just got like a whole
Gunrunners Arsenal.
Gunrunners Arsenal. That's right. So is that the type of thing you guys are going to implement? Because that would be a hell of a lot of content, and a lot of it probably already exists, like in some form released by somebody in the community. Because people love to go to those kind of modern firearms and get those into the Fallout games. Excuse me.
Both Gunrunner's Arsenal and the Courier's Stash add-ons will be present in base Fallout 4 New Vegas.
Very cool.
We'll be taking, for Courier's Stash, we're going to take some cues from the Jay Sawyer mod because he had some cool ways of integrating those into the world.
Yeah.
Which is a lot better than getting 3,000 DLC pop-ups when you want to start a game.
Oh man, the DLC pop-up thing, that's something I don't know how we solve that as a community, because we have that problem with mods too. There's so many mods that tell you when they update, they drop stuff in your inventory, and then the Creation Club stuff. Like I have a computer I set up where I installed all of the Creation Club stuff I had and just a crazy amount of mods, like took it right up to the limit. And to let a new game start, like just to let all that stuff pass, takes over 15 minutes. It's absurd.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that's something we're trying to mitigate a little bit.
I don't know how we solve that as a community. I feel like we need we need one patch mod that just takes all that stuff and stops it. Just gut punches it down so it stops coming up, because it's really obnoxious.
We need something that offloads that all to a holotape so you can check it to actually see if your stuff's functional.
Yeah, there you go. Or maybe that's where MCM can come into play and move on.
Definitely.
That. Yeah, I guess that's one of those. The Xbox has created a little bit of a rift in the community, and I have sided with the Xbox side of things just because I've seen how massive the audience is, and it's the whole point of when you create something is you want to share it with people. So any chance I get to share it with more people, I want to take. But one of the problems with the console community is the fact that we can't have the script extender over there. So then it effectively creates a point where there's some mods that are going to work on both, and they tend to do things one way, and then when you have the script extender, you get a lot more freedom and flexibility, and so then those mods tend to be a different way. And I know that is part of the problem with like why there's holotape spam and whatnot at the beginning, is because if you want to support Xbox, you can't just rely on MCM. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how solvable this will be as a community, as far as unless we do it with patches, because F4SE. One of my problems with I love F4, I love the script extender. It lets you do some really cool things, but unfortunately it always feels like a crutch of that. It's kind of the same. To me it's the same as if you wanted to support. I know you guys have no choice to pull off some of the stuff you want, so I'm not knocking on you or anything for this. It's just like
it's all good.
It's just like an interesting thing that comes up with the consoles involved, is that to me it's always felt like once you go into the script extender, it's the equivalent of only supporting people with like the latest graphics card. It's like you're limiting your audience, and it almost feels a little elitist when there's other people who can play the game. But I don't know, some people would argue the opposite side of like that. If console players are all holding us back, and like there's merit to both arguments. But it's unfortunate that it ends up creating kind of a divide in the mod space that way, because there are little problems like that crop up. Or another part of it that crops up is that we then are forced to severely limit the amount of files that we're willing to give players. So we might reduce the quality of textures, we might limit the number of variations of materials to make sure that we can support the console players. And it's an interesting little conundrum. So you guys don't have to deal with that at all. Was there ever talk of trying to get this to work on Xbox, or has that never been a thing because of all these weird limitations in the UI and the fact that you got to check for an install, etc.?
Basically, we'll call it a day one thing where we were like, well, we need F4SE.
Okay.
There's no two ways around it for this project because of the things we're doing. Just it requires engine level access for us to accomplish it.
Sure.
But we decided that whenever we feasibly can, any content that we can release in smaller packs for Xbox players, we should put out.
So I don't follow what's available on Xbox One. Have you guys been doing that so far with some of your weapons and whatnot?
The majority of our weapons and the bit of armor stuff we've released publicly has gone live on Xbox.
Awesome. Well, that's good. So there is some advantage to be had. Though, I mean, at the end of the day, I think anybody who's really obsessed with the game ends up picking it up on PC. And one of the fun things about the length of these games is, like, if you look at something like New Vegas, there's still major mods being developed today. And that mod came out in 2008. or that game came out in 2008. So there's been people
2010.
2010. Okay, so almost 10 years now, people have been modding that game. And on that kind of tail, then you're talking about like any garbage computer you pick up at a big box store will run that game now. So that like it's possible by the time you guys finally release Fallout 4 New Vegas, those players that were on Xbox will be able to just install it on whatever random computer they happen to have purchased in the last few years.
Yeah, no, it's a nice thing I'm holding out hope for.
Yeah.
I mean, in a perfect world, we just release this for Xbox and be done with it, because we don't really. It's not like an arbitrary decision we made where like it's we're like, man, I don't like consoles, they suck. It's really more of just a matter of practicality, because without F4SE on this mod, it's like, here's a good contextual thing. You're familiar with how the faction system works in Fallout 4.
Yes, it's very complicated.
Yeah, it would not be an understatement on my end to say it's kind of insane, right?
Yeah.
We have a very simple system built in F4C that we finished in like a few weeks' time after starting development.
Okay.
That allows us to very quickly call it when we're building quests.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
and it's the kind of thing.
I was just gonna say factions
you
are
don't
probably
trade that out.
my number one source of bugs, of just like accidentally causing all sorts of hell and chaos, because it's like, oh, didn't realize that faction did that. Oops.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to pretend ours is going to be bug-free or perfect, because I know what game we're remaking.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like little, like, even quality of life things that mean our development is going to go a lot smoother and faster.
Yeah.
It makes it worthwhile in our eyes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't fault you guys at all for using the script extender for the project you're undertaking. I just find it's an unfortunate division that occurs. And I don't think.
And I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I don't think it's really solvable. I don't know that we'll ever have the type of thing with script extender on a console. It just doesn't seem very realistic. I think if anything, we're going to be going to less control on consoles with this advent of things like Stadia and whatnot, where they're trying to centralize the software. I would say, if anything, modding as an art form is at risk in that regard. But the being able to pull off everything you want to and hit the majority of hardcore users is still a really cool thing. And I think even Xbox players would be happy to see that New Vegas is getting remade, and they can see it and have the hope of playing it one day, than not at all, because their console prevents the execution of it done properly. So I think it's a worthy sacrifice, I think, in everybody's eyes. But yeah, I'm very excited for this project. I think the videos you guys have been putting out look insane, and it's very cool that you guys are committed to releasing little bits of content for everybody to play. And I think on behalf of the community, I'll say thank you for doing that and making that a priority.
No, I mean, really, we should be thanking the community. Like, the amount of support we've gotten for this project is just... it is staggering, and it is completely humbling. The number of people who are just saying, hey man, thanks so much for this, or people like trying to offer us money, or people like throwing themselves at us to work on the project because they're just as rabid as I was when I discovered it. It's the kind of thing where you feel like you're really part of something big that goes beyond just, the four metaphorical walls of the team.
Right. Well, man, I think I could keep talking to you for hours more, because there's so much more I would love to cover with you, but maybe we'll do it another time, because if many of my listeners know, I actually am about to have a second child come into the world tomorrow, so I'm going to let you wrap up, but I would love to talk to you again. If you've got time in the future someday, we could catch up and see where you're at with the project.
Of course.
Fantastic.
Thank you for having me on. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. It's a treat to be able to talk to other mod authors, since my wife has no idea what I'm talking about. All right, great talking with you. Is there anything you want to say to the audience before we go? I know you guys have lots more to go in the development. You probably need more help. Is there a place people can go to apply, or anybody in particular you're looking for to move forward in your project?
We're always looking for new members of our level design team. Level designers are always hard to come by. So if anybody's interested in joining our team, you can check out our website at www.f4nv.com and check out the application tooltip at the top of the page. And if you'd like to find out more about the project itself, you can find us on Facebook under Fallout 4 New Vegas.
And is that where we would go? The Facebook, is that where you guys post your updates? Because periodically I see you post out new videos and whatnot. Where do we go to get those? You guys have an active YouTube channel? Do you do it all through social media?
We are active on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, all under the Fallout 4 New Vegas names.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's been great talking to you, Metamoth. I look forward to doing so again, and I really look forward to playing New Vegas again on the Fallout 4 engine.
Thank you so much. It was great to be on here.